one of my psychology students for several years, but he is now a graduate student in the clinical mental health counseling area. But he's continued to do some research on delay discounting and impulsivity, and so he is going to present that research for you.
Thank you, Dr. Dempsey. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Thanks so much for supporting this presentation. I want to talk to you briefly about our research that's on impulsive behavior, specifically delay discounting and associated measures of impulsive behavior, such as self-report measures. To begin, it's kind of important to understand what impulsivity is. And impulsivity is basically the tendency to act on a whim, to basically do an action without any thought behind the consequences that follow. Some of these actions may be unplanned responses that the person might have no thought or action behind it. And there are two types of impulsivity. There's functional and dysfunctional. Functional impulsivity may be such as doing a courageous act, such as what firefighters and such as doctors might have engaged in order to create a positive outcome. And then it might be dysfunctional, in which it might serve severity amongst the person themselves or for others. Impulsivity might display as a symptomatic approach, and such as having a negative effect on daily functioning. Consistent patterns of impulsive behavior, high-risk behaviors that might act into that, as well as the lack of understanding the cause and effect of such behavior. In terms of the clinical psychology and mental health counseling track, it's important amongst clinicians to view impulsivity closely when it impairs daily function. And for the assessment, it is intended to aid in determining the patient's tendency to see whether or not it really affects their behavior, their day-to-day well-being, and whether or not they apply for a specific disorder or not. And such information can be evaluated through clinical evaluations, different mental health assessments for diagnoses. But it's important to note that not everyone that experiences impulsivity meets criteria for diagnosis of a mental health disorder. That's why it's very important to have very clear diagnostic implications in place to make sure that there isn't a misdiagnosis or there isn't a false negative approach into assessing that individual. For counseling, the best approach we've noticed is cognitive behavioral therapy, known as CBT. And it's very beneficial for the individual to learn different strategies of how they can help control those impulses, those urges, those temptations. The goal of CBT is to help the clients with that impulsive behavior, or if they are diagnosed with impulsive control disorder, to tap into distorted thoughts, bring themselves into self-awareness, and be able to don't focus themselves on the present, since mostly the behavior is associated with more past behavior, associated with how they feel and how they responded from that lead them into wanting to have that urge to do it again. So tapping into that self-awareness and being in that present moment is one of the goals for CBT. Here's a list of mental health disorders as disordered by the DSM-5, or Diagnostic Statistics Manual of Mental Health Disorders. A few of them, just to name a few, is intoxication and withdrawal from substance abuse disorders, ADHD, and mood anxiety disorders such as bipolar and OCD. This is more of the lower level disorders of psychopathology, meaning there's not as less severe cases of that. When we go to this slide, this is more severe psychopathology, which is related to impulsivity, such as antisocial personality disorder, which we mainly see more within the incarceration and prison populations, borderline personality disorder with the lack of regulated emotions, disruptive behavioral disorders that we mostly see from earlier stages of development, such as oppositional defiant disorder that may increase into conduct disorder if the impulsive behavior isn't regulated properly within that child's development, intermittent explosive disorder, and such as, of course, addictions, the main one being gambling and the urge to steal of the main one. So how is impulsivity measured? We usually measure by two two types. We have self-reports, which are by questionnaires, polls, interviews, in which the individual tap within themselves to report on their own behaviors, their own beliefs and intentions. And we have delayed discounting measures, which the person may choose between the reward now or the reward later, and whether or not impulsivity plays a factor into such. So self-report measures is very valuable for both the researcher to have that information from the participant to have that personal self-report, as well as for the clinician to actually make a correct diagnosis. And so, some of those we've used are the variant impulsiveness scale, DIS-11 for short, or the Dickman impulsivity scale. Here's just a brief example of the DIS scale. It's a 30-item questionnaire. This is just a brief example. And some of the questions are on there such as, I plan tasks carefully, or I'm self-controlled. And here's an example of the Dickman impulsivity scale, just a brief example, which stands questions such as, I enjoy working on problems slowly and carefully, and often make up my mind without taking time to consider from all angles. And then we also have delayed discounted measures, which is, again, the person choosing a smaller, sooner reward or a larger, later reward. For example, whether you would have $100 right now versus $150 in 3 months. The common measures of delayed discounting is the Kirby monetary choice questionnaire, or the decreased adjustment method and the double limit method, which is a computer algorithm-based measure to help us determine the latest counting measures through a difference point. Here's an example of the Kirby monetary choice task, and this is just an example again. Let's say we'll ask a question such as, would you prefer $54 today, or would you prefer $55 in 117 days? Even though there's only a $1 difference, the majority would choose the $54 today. Or we might ask a question such as, would you choose 19 today, or 53 days, 25? And then we choose the measures within that. Just to quickly, again, explain the computer test that we've computerized. It's 2 computer algorithms. We try to discover the smallest amount from the larger amount. And it's work from the decreased adjustment algorithm is more strategic as opposed to the double limit, which is more of a randomized scale, but it's still narrowing within the margins of the choices that the participant choose. The purpose of our study are 2 things. One is to correlate the differences between the self-report measures as well as the delayed discounted measures and see if we have any relationship between the 2. And also to see whether they both measure impulsivity, whether they intertwine, and whether there's some similar constructs that they both measure up. So here's our sample. We have 760 participants here from Jacksonville State University, with 62% being from the freshman population. Great ethnic diversity amongst the participants, but the majority of our population is 65% female. The method we used, again, the participants chose the self-report measure, the DIS-11, or the Dickman impulsivity scale to give us that self-report measure, and then completed 2 measures of the delayed discounting, either the Kirby monetary choice questionnaire or the 2 computer algorithms of the DA and double limit method. The results we've gotten from our study, we showed that the 2 self-report measures, of the impulsivity, of the DIS-11 and the Dickman impulsivity, was very intercorrelated. So meaning that they had a very mutual relationship amongst the 2. However, the correlations between self-report and delayed discounting were not related. And it suggested that there are 2 types of impulsivity that's being measured within the two measures. And it supports that impulsivity is a very complex, multifaceted construct. So here's an example. Not the example, but here's our numbers that we have to make it easier. Here at the top left-hand corner, we see the intercorrelation between the self-report measures, the DIS-11 and the Dickman impulsivity scale. We see within the numbers they have a very high correlation within the mean range of 0.7. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you see the correlation between the delay discounted measures just within themselves. And we also see a very strong correlation amongst theirs. It was around 0.8, 0.7 or so. However, when you look here, when you're trying to measure within the vote collectively, we don't see a correlation. We use around numbers of 0.1, 0.1, 1.4, and then such very, very low levels. So what we learned that impulsivity, again, that tendency to just act on the whim, just to not think about the consequences that follow, just to act on the action itself and not think past. High levels of impulsivity may dispose people to behave in certain ways that might cause them to have a criteria for diagnosis of a disorder or not. But since it's so multifaceted, does that mean that clinicians should be able to use both measures to accurately diagnose their patients? The further future research will want to see whether that goes within the clinical population. Now, it's quickly to note that we've done this in only an academic setting, and we did not look specifically within that clinical population. Therefore, that's what we want further research for. We want to make sure that we have ethical guidelines in place to make sure that if we tap into the clinical population, we're not doing anything to make that patient or client much worse within their own disorder that he or she may have. In addition, lastly, we want to examine whether there are some correlations amongst the two, like I said, within the clinical population. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions or comments from me at this point? Yes, ma'am.
Can impulsivity, and this may be a crazy question, but can impulsivity be a habit? Or is it always a disorder? Do you have an opinion on that?
It can be as such depending on if that habit itself interferes with your day-to-day function consistently.
Then it becomes a disorder.
And it becomes a disorder where you cannot control
Right, okay.
that impulsive
Right.
urge, that temptation. If you have a lack of resistance, then it becomes more, we go look into it as a disorder. And proper diagnosis has to be in place in order to make sure that is an actual disorder or not, which is very important. We just can't say you're very impulsive, you must have a mental health disorder. You have to be very careful with that. That's why proper diagnosis has to be in place. But if you have a hard time controlling those urges and resisting that, it's definitely something that we look into for the future, just to help yourself and your well-being day to day.